In 1970, a fisherman off the coast of Suffolk, England, pulled up something that shouldn't exist. It wasn't fish. It was a medieval church bell covered in barnacles and seaweed, with Latin inscriptions still visible after 400 years underwater. That bell came from one of England's largest cities, a place that was bigger than Leicester, bigger than Coventry, bigger than most cities you know today. A city so wealthy, it paid more taxes than entire counties. A city so powerful, it controlled international trade routes and sent more MPs to Parliament than cities 10 times its size. Today, that entire city lies beneath the North Sea. Streets, houses, churches, palaces, all of it swallowed by the waves. This is the incredible true story of how one of medieval England's greatest cities simply vanished. The name of this lost city was Dunwich. And if you've never heard of it, that's exactly the point. This is one of the most dramatic urban disasters in recorded history. Yet, it's been almost completely forgotten. What makes Dunwich extraordinary isn't just that it disappeared, it's that we have detailed records of exactly how it happened. Medieval chroniclers documented every storm, every collapse, every desperate attempt to save the dying city. We know the names of the last residents, the dates when each church fell into the sea, even what the final church service sounded like. Marine archaeologists have found the ruins scattered across the sea floor, streets laid out in perfect medieval grids, stone foundations of houses where families lived for generations, harbour walls that once welcomed ships from across Europe, an entire civilization preserved in salt water and sand. But here's the most incredible part. Dunwich didn't disappear overnight. It took 700 years to die, and the process was so slow that people just forgot it had ever been important. By the time the last building fell into the sea, the world had moved on. This is the story of England's Atlantis, and the mystery of how an entire city can vanish from history itself. To understand how shocking Dunwich's disappearance really was, you need to grasp just how massive this city once was, and the numbers will blow your mind. In the year 1200, England had only a handful of major cities. London was the biggest, obviously, then York, Norwich, and Bristol. But number 4 on that list, Dunwich, a coastal town in Suffolk that most people today have never heard of. The city stretched for nearly 2 miles along the coast. Its harbour was one of the largest in England, with stone quays that could handle the biggest ships of the era. The harbour master's records, which miraculously survive, show ships arriving from Germany, France, Flanders, and even as far as the Baltic Sea. Here's a fact that medieval historians love. Dunwich paid more in taxes than most major cities today. In 1334, its tax contribution was higher than Leicester, Coventry, or Derby. The wealth came from one source: wool. England's raw wool was the medieval equivalent of oil, and Dunwich was one of the main export hubs. But the most mind-blowing detail is the churches. 8 of them. Massive stone buildings that took decades to construct. St. Peter's Church alone was described by contemporary sources as rivaling York Minster in size. The tower was so tall, it served as a lighthouse for ships 20 miles out at sea. And here's where it gets really interesting. From 1295 to 1832, that's 537 years, Dunwich sent 2 members of Parliament to Westminster. 2. That's more representation than cities 10 times its size. The political influence was enormous. Dunwich MPs helped shape trade laws, maritime regulations, and foreign policy. All of this power, all of this wealth, all of this influence, it was built on the most dangerous foundation imaginable. Sand and clay cliffs, sitting right on the edge of one of Europe's stormiest seas. The first sign that something was wrong came in 1286, but nobody recognized it for what it was: the beginning of the end. A massive storm hit the Suffolk coast that winter. The waves were higher than anyone had ever seen. When morning came, several buildings near the harbour had been damaged and the port was filled with sand and debris. The townspeople cleaned it up and went back to business as usual. But then, the records start to tell a different story. The harbour master's accounts show that fewer large ships were docking. Some of the biggest merchant vessels were going to other ports instead. The tax records show a slight decline in revenue. Nobody connected the dots. Nobody realised that the North Sea had just declared war on Dunwich. Here's what was actually happening. The Suffolk coast sits on some of the softest rock in Britain. The cliffs are made of sand and clay that dissolve easily in salt water. Every wave that hits the shore carries away microscopic particles of the land. It's called longshore drift, and it's been happening for millions of years. Under normal conditions, this process is almost invisible. But the North Sea isn't normal. It's prone to massive storms that can generate waves over 30 feet high. When these monster waves hit soft cliffs, they don't just erode, they devour. The storms kept coming. 1287 brought another massive tempest. 1288 saw the worst flooding in living memory. Each time, more buildings were damaged. Each time, the harbour got a little shallower. Each time, it became harder for the big trading ships to dock safely. The townspeople weren't stupid. They could see what was happening. They organised work crews to clear the harbour. They built wooden barriers to protect the most vulnerable buildings. They even petitioned the king for help with flood defences. But they had no idea what was coming, because in 1328, the North Sea was about to show them what real destruction looked like. The storm that hit Dunwich on the night of January 1st, 1328, was unlike anything in recorded history. Medieval chroniclers described it as supernatural. Modern meteorologists think it might have been the worst storm to hit Britain in the entire 14th century. The wind was so powerful it lifted the roofs off entire buildings and carried them inland. The waves were so high they topped the church spires. The storm surge was so massive it flooded areas that had never seen water before. Here's what one chronicler wrote. The sea rose up like a mountain and devoured the land. Houses were swept away as if they were made of straw. The very earth seemed to dissolve beneath the waves. When dawn broke, the damage was catastrophic. Over 400 houses had been completely destroyed. 3 entire churches, St. Martin's, St. Nicholas's and St. Leonard's, had collapsed into the sea. The harbour entrance was blocked by debris, and for the first time in its history, Dunwich's future was genuinely in doubt. The personal accounts are heartbreaking. Families who had lived in the same houses for generations found themselves homeless overnight. The wealthy merchant, Thomas de Dunwich, lost his warehouse, his house, and his private wharf in a single night. The monks at St. James's Priory watched their library, containing manuscripts that had taken centuries to collect, wash away in the storm surge. But the real killer wasn't the immediate damage. It was the economic consequences. With the harbour blocked, the big merchant ships couldn't dock. Trade dried up almost overnight. The wealthy families who had made their fortunes in international commerce started looking for opportunities elsewhere. The 1330s saw the first major wave of emigration from Dunwich. Entire families packed up and moved to other ports. The population dropped from over 4,000 to about 2,500. 5 churches were still standing, but they were serving fewer and fewer people. The 1328 storm was just the beginning. It had shown the sea how to destroy Dunwich, and over the next 400 years, the sea would finish what it started. What happened next is one of the most bizarre chapters in English history. Because Dunwich didn't just disappear. It became a zombie city, clinging to life long after it should have died. The population kept falling. By 1400, it was down to 2,000. By 1500, just 800 people remained. By 1600, fewer than 200. Each generation was smaller than the last, as young people left to find opportunities elsewhere. The churches started closing one by one. St. John's was abandoned in 1408. St. Bartholomew's fell into the sea in 1540. St. Peter's, The great cathedral-sized church that had been the pride of the city was demolished in 1702 because it was too dangerous to use. But the remaining residents never gave up. They tried everything medieval and early modern technology could offer. They built sea walls, they created artificial harbours. They even attempted to redirect the local river to prevent silting. Some of these efforts worked for decades, buying precious time for the dying city. Here's where the story gets truly surreal. Even as Dunwich shrank to a tiny village, it kept sending 2 members of Parliament to Westminster. By 1800, the great port city had fewer than 50 residents, but it still had the same political power it had wielded in its medieval heyday. Dunwich became one of the most notorious, rotten boroughs in England. A handful of voters could effectively buy seats in Parliament. The absurdity was so obvious that satirists made Dunwich a symbol of everything wrong with the British electoral system. The last 2 churches, All Saints and St. Peter's, clung to the cliff edge like desperate survivors. All Saints was partially demolished in 1677 when the tower began leaning over the cliff. Services continued in the remaining part of the building until 1755, when the congregation finally gave up. The final church service at All Saints was attended by just 12 people. The rector, knowing it was the end, gave a sermon about impermanence and faith. When the last hymn was sung, the tiny congregation walked out of the church and never returned. 6 months later, the remaining tower fell into the sea. Local witnesses reported something extraordinary. They could hear the church bells ringing beneath the waves for days afterward, as if the drowned church was still calling the faithful to worship. The story of the underwater bells isn't just local folklore. It's been reported consistently for over 250 years, and marine archaeologists think it might actually be true. When large bronze bells fall into the sea, they can become trapped in underwater caves and crevices. The acoustics of these natural chambers can amplify sound, creating an echo effect that carries for miles. On calm days, when the tide is just right, these submerged bells can still ring. Local fishermen have been pulling up artifacts from the drowned city for centuries. Medieval pottery, carved stones, jewelry, coins, even human bones from the old graveyards. Each catch is a message from the lost city, proof that an entire civilization lies just beneath the waves. Modern marine archaeology has confirmed many of these stories. Underwater surveys have found the foundations of buildings, remnants of the harbour walls, and yes, church bells embedded in the seafloor. The most famous discovery was made in 1970, when that fisherman pulled up a bell from All Saints Church with its Latin inscriptions still readable. The ruins are scattered across nearly 2 square miles of seafloor. Streets are still laid out in medieval patterns. Stone foundations mark where houses stood for centuries. The harbour walls are still visible, though they are now covered in seaweed and inhabited by crabs. The cold, oxygen-poor water of the North Sea has preserved organic materials that would have rotted away on land. Archaeologists have found wooden beams, leather shoes, even fragments of medieval textiles. It's like a time capsule of 14th century life. But here's the strange part. Much of underwater Dunwich remains unexplored. The North Sea is rough and dangerous, making archaeological work extremely difficult. Most of the city's secrets are still down there, waiting to be discovered. Even today, people report unusual phenomena near the Dunwich coast. Unexplained lights beneath the water, strange sounds on foggy nights. Fishermen who swear they've seen the outline of buildings when the tide is exceptionally low. Scientists dismiss most of these reports as optical illusions or misidentified natural phenomena. But they can't explain everything. The underwater bells, the perfectly preserved artifacts, the detailed layout of the sunken city. There's clearly more to discover about England's lost Atlantis. Today, Dunwich exists in a strange state between life and death. The village has 84 residents, a small museum, and a pub called the Ship Inn. but it's what's missing that makes the place so haunting. The current village sits on what was once the very edge of the medieval city. Everything that made Dunwich important, the harbour, the churches, the merchant houses, the guild halls, all of it is underwater. The modern village is basically living on the medieval city's back garden. The sea isn't finished with Dunwich. The erosion continues at a rate of about 6 feet per year. During major storms, the cliff can lose 30 feet in a single night. The medieval ruins that are still on land, the leper hospital, the friary, are slowly moving toward the cliff edge. The most poignant reminder is the graveyard of All Saints' Church. Ancient tombstones tilt toward the sea, their inscriptions worn smooth by centuries of salt wind. Every few years, another grave marker falls onto the beach below. Local authorities estimate the graveyard has maybe 20 years left. There's an ongoing race between archaeologists and the sea. Researchers are desperately trying to excavate and document the remaining medieval sites before they disappear forever. But it's a losing battle. The sea is patient, but it's also relentless. The biggest mystery isn't what happened to Dunwich, it's what we still don't know about it. Medieval records mention a royal palace, a Jewish quarter, and several important buildings that have never been found. These secrets are presumably underwater, waiting for technology advanced enough to explore them safely. Dunwich isn't just a local curiosity. It's one of the most complete examples of a medieval city preserved underwater. Marine archaeologists from around the world come to study it, hoping to understand how medieval people lived, worked, and built their communities. But perhaps the most intriguing question is this: how many other Dunwiches are out there? How many other lost cities lie beneath the waves, forgotten by history, but preserved by the sea? The answer, according to marine archaeologists, is probably hundreds. The story of Dunwich is one of the most extraordinary tales in English history, yet it's been almost completely forgotten. A city that rivaled London disappeared into the sea over the course of 7 centuries, leaving behind only legends and underwater ruins. The facts are staggering. Over 4,000 people lived there at its peak. 8 churches dominated the skyline. 2 MPs represented the city in Parliament for over 500 years. Ships from across Europe docked in its harbour, and now it's all underwater, slowly being reclaimed by sand and seaweed. But Dunwich isn't just history, it's a living mystery. The bells still ring beneath the waves. Fishermen still pull up artifacts from the drowned city. The erosion continues, revealing new secrets as it destroys old ones. In an age when we think we know everything about our past, Dunwich reminds us that there are still incredible stories waiting to be discovered. Sometimes the most amazing mysteries are hiding in plain sight, beneath the waves, just off the coast of Suffolk. If you enjoyed this journey into England's lost city, please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what other hidden mysteries you'd like to explore. History is full of forgotten stories like Dunwich, waiting to be told. Until next time, keep digging into the past. You never know what you might find.